Former Blackhawks head coach Joel Quenneville and GM Stan Bowman will soon be allowed to seek employment as we look at the big winners and losers on day one of NHL free agency. Hey everyone, welcome to Off the Post. Rob Wong, joined alongside by Toronto Sun Sports columnist Steve Simmons, Canucks reporter for the Vancouver Sun and the Province Patrick Johnston, and Postmedia hockey columnist Bruce Garriock. And guys, we'll get to the free agent frenzy momentarily, but it's hard not to think the NHL tried to sneak in some news on Monday during all of the free agency chaos, announcing that former Blackhawks head coach Joel Quenneville, GM Stan Bowman, and Senior VP of Hockey Ops Al MacIsaac have all been reinstated more than 2 years after they were banned following the sexual assault scandal in Chicago. They are allowed to look for work, but can't sign a contract with an NHL team until July the 10th. Steve, what did you make of the news?
Well, first of all, it was rather sneaky on their part to try and pull this through late in the day on the greatest spending day in NHL history. Let's just slide this one through. And by the way, it was a question I asked Gary Bettman at his State of the Union NHL press conference at the Stanley Cup Final. I asked what is the situation with Joel Quenneville and Stan Bowman, and he hummed and he hawed and he hammed it, and they went on from there and didn't answer. I actually have no problem with this, to be perfectly honest, and I'm going to explain why. Kyle Beach has been in touch with, Kyle Beach being the sexual assault victim, has been in touch with Joel Quenneville, and they have talked about what happened, and they have talked about, this is my understanding anyhow, and Kyle Beach has given his blessing for Joel Quenneville to return. And if the person who is the victim here is giving his blessing for Joel Quenneville to return, then I'm going to give my blessing too.
I wish when I heard Joel Quenneville on Andy Strickland's podcast with Cam Jansen in St. Louis, that he'd shown a little bit more in the way of remorse. And I, quite frankly, taken a little bit more responsibility for what happened in Chicago. That being said, I guess everybody deserves a second chance. If this was, though, Patrick, here's what I think. If this was some sort of test balloon to see how the people of Edmonton will react to the possibility of Stan Bowman being their general manager, it's July 2nd. Nobody can be hired till July 10th. We're going to find out pretty quickly how the people in Edmonton feel about having that kind of leadership in their front office, because that's certainly where he's been rumored to go.
The one thing I think about in all this, and I'm the same as Bruce, everyone deserves a second chance, is has the lessons been learned? Do they understand what went wrong? Why they were at fault? They signed off on a coach who was already under suspicion. They signed off. They gave him recognition. He went on to a school where a kid suffered because of them passing him along. Yeah. And that was fundamentally, underneath all of this, the problem. And so it's good to hear that Kyle Beach has been able to engage with Joel Quenneville. I'm the same as Bruce. In the public moments that Quenneville has had, he has not showed himself well. And that's where it comes back. And if I'm one of the players, and to me, yes, there's going to be the public reaction, absolutely. But if I'm a player in Edmonton or wherever, that's what I'm going to want to know is, do these guys understand that their job is there to obviously be the coach and be the manager, but there's an expectation of care, of standard, of professionalism, of understanding what is right and wrong and how people deal with each other when it comes to sexual assault, that sexual assault is not what, conventionally they may think it is, or it's a guy going at a girl, that this can happen guy on guy, it's kind of girl on girl, girl on guy. Like the way that we understand sexual assault is not black and white. And that when you are in charge and a thing is raised, an issue is raised, a serious issue is raised, you need to respond promptly, professionally, and effectively. And that is not what happened with the Blackhawks back in the day. And now that's what my point is that the lesson needs to be learned, and you would hope that they have learned that.
But if you look at this from a criminal world point of view, going to court point of view, the person who commits the crime is ostensibly responsible for the crime. The people who are surrounding that, whether they're party to it or what their place was, they're not as responsible. And we have to understand, Joel Quenneville and Stan Bowman were not the perpetrators here. They did not. They looked the other way. They turned away. They didn't act appropriately, but they didn't commit the crime. And so we have to understand there's a difference between committing the crime and being party to the crime.
Well, it should be a very interesting next 8 days or so, as I'm sure the rumor mill will continue to swirl with all of these gentlemen's names in it. Meanwhile, we saw, of course, on day one of NHL free agency, with the salary cap going up, Bruce, teams went on a spending spree, to say the least, doled out more than $1 billion on Monday. Which team do you think made out the best on day one?
Well, I think you have to look at the Nashville Predators. And, they spent an awful lot of money, but they made a splash. And I think they brought in some leadership with Steven Stamkos. I think that's going to be a bit of an adjustment for him leaving Tampa to go play for them. But I really think that if you look at the way that Barry Trotz acted in free agency, I think that puts them in a very, very good spot. I think, they made a serious push. We'll see where it goes. Sure, they were the biggest spenders, but I think, you look at the guys they got, Steve, I think they did very well.
I think the team without a general manager had the best day of all, and that's the Edmonton Oilers. They were one goal away from going to overtime in Game 7. They basically have their entire roster back, and they've added Jeff Skinner and Victor Arvidsson. We're not talking about just adding guys. Jeff Skinner's 6-time 30-goal scorer. Arvidsson is a 4-time 50-point guy. We're talking about legitimate NHL producers. 2 more on a team that's got Draisaitl and has Hyman and has Nugent Hopkins and has McDavid. And, just there's that goal they needed with 3 minutes to go or 2 minutes to go. So if you put one of those guys in a front line situation, you saw what happened with Hyman when he went from 25 or 30 goals in other places to 50 there. Jeff Skinner's got hands way better than Zach Hyman, and is a terrific skater too, by the way. So I think those are really good signings for a team that's already really, really good.
I have one underdog team perhaps down the list maybe we haven't thought about. I'm really impressed with what the Devils did, adding Brad Pesky and Brendan Dillon. That's a team that had a lot of good stuff up front. They needed to play better on the back end. Obviously, they added Jacob Markstrom as well. I'm really interested to see how this all ends up.
Well, I want to get in on the Devils for 1 second, because every GM or coach, mostly coaches, because GMs weren't really available yesterday, but most coaches I spoke to, everybody wanted the 2 guys the Devils got. So many teams went after them, and the Devils closed. And you know what? It's the old Shohei Ohtani thing. Finishing second doesn't mean anything. So give Tommy Fitzgerald and the Devils credit. They got 2 guys that virtually every team chasing defenseman wanted.
I will say one thing, though, about that genius in Edmonton. He did sign Josh Brown for 3 years, and I think he's going to regret that one. Anyway, let's not pat him on the back too much. Steve, you're kind of making me a little ill here.
I know. Not my favorite either, but I love what he did yesterday.
Well, he says he doesn't want the job, but he's doing a pretty good job yesterday. So,
on the Devils, I'll just say Brendan Dillon in many ways is what he does. He actually does what people want Nikita Zadorov to do. Nikita Zadorov is a fun player. Obviously had a great experience here in Vancouver. He's gone and gotten the money in Boston, but Brendan Dillon's tough and mean and plays smart, and he's perfect for that lineup. He's exactly what they need.
All right, well, lastly, if there's winners, there's got to be some losers, Patrick. We already heard Bruce mention one contract that he didn't like. Is there one that you saw sign on Monday that made you shake your head?
I know where you're going, Patrick, and you're going to take mine, but go ahead.
Chris Tanev?
Oh, I wasn't thinking that one. Okay.
Vinny Desharnais. Vinny Desharnais is going to be fine here, but Chris Tanev, love the player. I would be anxious about the term. To sign a guy till he's 40 is just so unconventional. Maybe it'll work, but until the last couple of years, Chris Tanev has struggled to stay healthy. Maybe Brad Treliving knows something we don't, because obviously he signed him in Calgary as well. But if I'm a Leafs fan, I'm a bit anxious about that Tanev signing. It certainly will be great next year, but probably the year after. But 3-4 years down the line, not so sure.
I don't think they care what happens in the final 2 years. They get 4 years out of him, they're getting value.
Yeah. You know what, Steve? He'll be on Robida Island with you.
Yeah. We'll be there. By the way, an important thing.
And I might join you on Robot Island too at that point.
I'll be happy to accept you. The Dallas Stars were 15-4 with Chris Tanev the final 19 games of the regular season. He changed that team. You talk to the coaches there, and I have in the past few days. They love this guy. They adore him, and they were so upset that he left and that they couldn't, that their owner would not go 6 years and do what any other sane person would do. But boy, they talk about how he really came in, and they think he'll have similar impact in Toronto if the upper echelon boys get tapped in at all.
Well, the guy I thought you were going to say, Patrick, and I thought you were going to take was Elias Lindholm.
Yeah, that's a good one. Too. Absolutely.
7 years and $7.5 million.
Do the Bruins have
Boston?
Do the Bruins have pro scouts?
Yeah.
How could you possibly pay this guy what they paid him if you watched him the last 2 seasons?
Yeah, it's the guy's fallen off. He was great that year between Tkachuk and Gaudreau. We all thought that, okay, here's a player who he's not going to drive the line, but he's the center you want. But last year, obviously, lost his way. And then even in Vancouver here, he couldn't find what he needed. And if I'm looking at where his career is going, it's not where the Bruins think it's going.
They're chasing Patrice Bergeron, too, is what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I suspect they'll come up short on that. I'm going to go to Los Angeles. And I don't know if you remember years ago in the NBA draft when the late Rob Babcock did something. I can't remember who came on the draft and said, "What is Rob Babcock doing?" Well, somebody should have gone on one of the networks yesterday and said, "What is Rob Blake doing?" He signed Joel Edmondson 4 years, more than 3.7 $1 million a year for a guy who could barely dress for the teams he's been on the last. You're talking about a sixth defenseman in today's NHL. Why in whatever's name you would sign him for 4 years and almost $4 million a year is mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, I think Ottawa kicked tires on him, but I think that
he's a $2 million player.
Just because of the owner's connection to him in Montreal when he played for the Habs. I'm with you, though. I mean, Ottawa kicked tires on every right shot defenseman, and like Matt Roy, Brett Pesce, Brandon Montour, and the market, and all those guys said no, and the market just got too rich for them.
Yeah, well, they call it silly season for a reason, and we saw it in a lot of ways on July 1. As always, leave your thoughts in the comments section below. For Steve Simmons, Patrick Johnston, and Bruce Garriock, I'm Rob Wong. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.